There are things you build for a family that are never recorded anywhere as yours. They do not appear in the minutes of any meeting. They are not listed on any document. They exist in the specific, quiet way that foundations exist, underneath everything, invisible by design, noticed only in the abstract when someone else takes credit for the structure standing. I have been building things for my family since I was 19 years old. Not loudly. Not with the expectation of recognition, or not consciously. Not at first. I built because I was good at it and because no one else was going to do it, and because I told myself for a long time, in the way you tell yourself things that feel true enough to keep you moving, that being useful was the same as being valued. I understand now that those are two entirely different things. My name is Jonelle Carver. I am 34 years old. I am a certified public accountant living in Cincinnati, Ohio, and on a Tuesday in March, at 2:17 in the afternoon, I sat in a conference room in my parents' house and watched my father sign the business he had built over 30 years to my brother Marcus, who has not filed his personal taxes on time since 2016. My father shook Marcus's hand. He said, "You've always been the responsible one." I was 2 chairs to his left. The succession document open on my laptop was the one I had written. This is what came before that moment, and what I have been doing since. Before I tell you what happened in that room, I want to ask you something. What is the weather like where you are right now? Is it the kind of day that feels like it should matter, cold and gray and particular, or is it ordinary, the kind of afternoon that does not announce itself? I ask because I have been thinking about the difference between the days that feel significant and the days that simply are. March in Cincinnati is neither. It is the month that cannot decide what it wants to be. That Tuesday was overcast and 44 degrees and entirely unremarkable from the outside, and I drove to my parents' house on Fairfax Avenue in the same Honda I have driven for 6 years with the heat on, and a travel mug of coffee in the cup holder, and the 22-page document I had spent 11 days writing loaded on my laptop in the passenger seat. I did not know, driving there, that it was the last time I would make that drive as the person my family called when something needed to be done correctly. My father, Gerald Carver, is 64 years old. He started Carver Commercial Services, a mid-sized commercial cleaning and facilities management company in Greater Cincinnati, in 1993 with a single contract and a van he had borrowed from his brother-in-law. By the time I was in high school, the company had 34 employees and contracts with 6 office parks and a regional hospital system. By the time I passed my CPA exam at 23, it had 61 employees and a fleet of 7 vehicles and a bookkeeping system so outdated it was running on software that had not been updated since 2004. My father is a man who is extraordinary at beginning things and building the first version of them and considerably less interested in the maintenance that follows. He is warm in the way people are warm when rooms fill up around them naturally, when they have never had to work for attention because attention arrived early and stayed. He tells stories at dinner that go longer than they need to, and everybody listens because he tells them well. He knows the names of his employees' children and their anniversary months and the teams they root for. He is genuinely well-loved, and he has never in his life had to think about why. I want to be precise about this because I spent years not being precise about it, years softening the edges of what I noticed into something more manageable, something I could live inside without it changing the way I moved through Sunday dinners and holiday tables and the quarterly calls where my father would say, "Jonelle, I don't know what we'd do without you," and mean it in the way people mean things that do not cost them anything to say. My father loves me. I am certain of that in the plain, factual sense. He also learned somewhere early to measure a child's value by the volume of their presence, and I have never been loud, and Marcus has never been quiet, and that arithmetic was settled long before I understood I was inside it. Marcus is 37. He is 3 years older than me and has operated, for as long as I can remember, with the particular confidence of someone who has never been asked to prove himself to the people who matter most to him. He is not malicious. I want to be clear about that because this story could easily be told as a story about a villain, and that is not what it is. Marcus is a man who received, early and consistently, the message that he was enough, and he became, quite reasonably, a person who acts like he is enough. He can be generous. He remembers birthdays. He is good at the kind of warmth that registers in a room. The handshake, the shoulder clap, the story told to the table that lands exactly right. He has run a territory sales role for a beverage distributor for 8 years, and he is good at it, in the way he is good at things that reward personality over precision. He is not a detail person. He is not a systems person. He filed his 2021 personal taxes in November of 2022 after a penalty notice and called me at 7 p.m. on a Thursday to ask me to explain what an estimated payment was. I explained it. I did not charge him. I became a CPA because the numbers made sense to me in a way that other things did not, and because I found, early in my career, that there was a specific satisfaction in the kind of work that required absolute accuracy. The knowledge that the answer was either right or it wasn't, that precision was not optional, that the standard existed independent of whether anyone acknowledged you meeting it. I have worked for the same mid-size accounting firm, Hendricks & Lowe, for 9 years. I make a salary I am not going to describe in detail, but that is comfortable, that I have built carefully, that I have managed with the same precision I apply to everything else.
I am good at my job.
I am the person my clients call when something is wrong because they know I will find it and I will fix it and I will explain it to them without condescension, in language that respects that they understand their business even if they do not understand the tax code. I started helping with my parents' business finances in 2018 when I was 27. When my father mentioned at Thanksgiving that their bookkeeper of 12 years had retired and they were having trouble finding a replacement, I offered to take a look. That is how it began. I took a look. I drove over on a Sunday in December with my laptop and spent 4 hours reviewing the books, and by the end of those 4 hours I understood that the business had been operating with a financial infrastructure that had not been updated in over a decade, that the entity structure was inefficient for their current revenue level, and that there were 3 recurring expense categorizations that had been wrong for so long they had become invisible. I did not say all of this at once. I said I thought I could help get things organized and that I would be happy to take it on, and my father said, "Jonelle, that would be incredible," and my mother squeezed my hand across the kitchen table, and that was the beginning of the 6 years. I want to tell you what those 6 years actually looked like, because I think the summary she helped with the finances does not carry the specific weight of what it was. Every January, I prepared their federal and state business returns. I prepared my parents' personal returns as well, and Marcus's, when he asked, which was most years. I reconciled the business accounts at the end of every quarter, which meant driving over on a Sunday with my laptop and sitting at the kitchen table for 3 to 5 hours depending on the complexity of what I found, and I always found something: a miscategorized expense, a missed deduction, a vendor payment that had been recorded twice. I attended the annual insurance review meeting starting in 2019 and negotiated 2 premium reductions by documenting claims history in a format their broker had not seen before. I set up a new accounting software system in 2020, which involved migrating 8 years of historical data and training their office manager, a woman named Denise Whitfield who had been with the company for 11 years and who learned the new system in 3 weeks and sent me a handwritten thank you card that I still have in the drawer of my desk at home. In 2019, I caught the $47,000 discrepancy. I want to describe this precisely because it is the piece of my work that, if any single piece had ever been going to register with my father as evidence of what I was doing, should have been that piece. Their previous accountant, a man named Howard Brill, who had done their taxes for 7 years before I took over, had misclassified a series of equipment lease payments as capital expenditures across 3 consecutive tax years. The error was not immediately visible. It required cross-referencing the depreciation schedule against the original lease agreements and running a comparison against the applicable IRS guidance, which I did over the course of 2 evenings in February, because something in the numbers felt wrong to me, and I do not leave things that feel wrong alone. The correction resulted in a $47,000 reduction in overpaid taxes, recovered across 2 amended returns. My father, when I explained this to him at the kitchen table on a Sunday in March, said, "Jonelle, you are something else." He said it with genuine feeling. He meant it. He poured himself a glass of water and said, "What would we do without you?" And I said, "Let's make sure you never have to find out." And he laughed, and we moved on, and nothing changed in the fundamental structure of how I was seen in that family. I began the succession planning work in the summer of 2022 after my father's cardiologist, a Dr. Patricia Mensa, told him at his annual physical that his blood pressure was elevated and that given his age and his family history, it was time to think seriously about reducing his stress load. My father told me this on the phone on a Tuesday evening in July, somewhat casually, in the way he tells me things that are actually significant with the lightness of a man who has decided not to be frightened by them. He said, "Doc says I should start thinking about stepping back from the day-to-day." He said it the way you say, "Doc says I should drink more water." I said, "Okay, let's talk about what that looks like." We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of the call, I had a list of 7 items I needed to research before we could have a real conversation about transition options. Over the following 4 months, I built the succession framework. I researched the 3 most viable structures for transitioning the business: internal transfer to family, sale to a third party, and management buyout, and prepared a comparative analysis of each, including the tax implications for my parents at their current income and asset levels, the operational risks of each approach, and the timeline considerations given the company's current contracts and staffing. I consulted on my own time with a colleague at Hendricks & Lowe who specialized in business transition work. I reviewed the existing entity structure and identified 2 modifications that would reduce the tax burden of an internal transfer by approximately $31,000. I contacted their business attorney, a man named Raymond Kowalczyk, who had drafted the original operating agreement in 2003 and who was at 71, still sharp and thorough, and capable of the kind of careful attention that good legal work requires. Raymond and I spoke for times over the course of those months. He told me, in our third call, that my preparation was the most thorough pre-transition analysis he had received from a family client in 20 years of practice. I wrote that down. I do not usually write compliments down, but I wrote that one down in the small leather notebook I keep in my bag, and I have thought about why I wrote it down, and I think it is because some part of me understood, even then, that I was accumulating evidence for a case I was going to have to make eventually. The document I produced was 22 pages. It covered the entity structure, the recommended transfer mechanism, the tax implications in 3 scenarios depending on timing, the transition timeline, the key person risk analysis, the staffing considerations for the leadership gap, and the documentation checklist for the closing process. I sent it to my father in late October. He called me the next day and said, "Jonelle, this is extraordinary." He said, "I don't know how you do this." I said, "It's what I do, Dad." He said, "We need to sit down and talk about next steps." I said, "Absolutely. Whenever you're ready." I want to tell you about the Sundays. 6 years of Sundays. I drove across Cincinnati on Sunday mornings with my laptop in the passenger seat and my coffee in the cup holder, and the specific mental state that I have when I am going to do work that matters, that quiet organizational focus that is not excitement exactly, but is something adjacent to it, the feeling of competence about to be applied. I sat at my parents' kitchen table while my mother made lunch and my father watched football in the other room and sometimes wandered in to ask questions I would answer while my hands were still on the keyboard, without stopping, the way you answer questions you know the answers to. I stayed for lunch most times. I drove home in the late afternoon. I did not track the hours because tracking the hours would have required acknowledging that the hours were significant, and acknowledging that the hours were significant would have required asking what they were worth, and asking what they were worth would have required confronting a question I was not ready to confront. My co-worker and closest friend, Vanessa Osei, who has been at Hendricks & Lowe for 7 years, and who has the particular quality of saying the true thing without cruelty, told me something in 2021 that I've thought about many times since. We were having lunch at the Thai place 2 blocks from the office, and I was describing the quarterly reconciliation I had done the previous Sunday, and she said, "Jonelle, you know you could charge for this." I said, "It's family." She said, "I know. I'm not saying charge them. I'm saying you could. And the fact that you don't, make sure you know what that costs you." I told her I knew what it cost me. I told her it was worth it. She looked at me the way Vanessa looks at me when she disagrees but has decided to let me arrive somewhere on my own, and she went back to her pad CEW, and we talked about something else. She was right. I had not fully let myself know what it cost. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday in March at 1 p.m. My father had called me the previous Thursday to say he wanted to move forward with the internal transfer and that he had spoken with Raymond and that they were ready to proceed. He said he wanted me there to walk everyone through the document. He said, "You know this better than anyone." I confirmed the meeting. I reviewed the document twice over the weekend and prepared a one-page summary of the key terms and timeline that I printed in 3 copies. I drove to Fairfax Avenue. I arrived at 12:47 p.m. The conference room was the spare bedroom my parents had converted in 2015 when the business outgrew the kitchen table, a folding table, 6 chairs, a whiteboard my father had bought at an office supply store and never fully erased. When I arrived, Raymond Kowalczyk was already there, setting up his papers with the methodical care of a man who's been doing this for 40 years. He greeted me by name and asked how the reconciliation work was going, and I told him it was going well, and we talked for a few minutes about the entity modification I had recommended, and he said he agreed with my analysis and that he had incorporated it into the transfer documents. My mother was in the kitchen. My father was on a call that ran until 1:07 p.m. Marcus arrived at 1:04 p.m. He came in with the energy he always brings into rooms, the handshake for Raymond, the shoulder squeeze for me, the immediate comfortable occupation of physical space. He had not read the document. I knew this because when he sat down, he looked at the printed copy in front of him with the specific expression of someone encountering it for the first time, and because when my father came in and said, "Marcus, Jonelle put together an incredible analysis," Marcus said, "Yeah, she's the best," in the tone of someone who is agreeing with a general statement rather than engaging with a specific one. My father sat at the head of the table. Raymond sat to his right. Marcus sat 2 chairs from my father on the left side. I sat 2 chairs from my father on the right side, with my laptop open, the document on the screen. My mother came in with 4 glasses of water and stood in the doorway for a moment and then went back to the kitchen. I walked them through the document. I explained the entity modification and the tax implications. I explained the transfer timeline. I explained the key person provisions and what they meant for operational continuity. Raymond confirmed the legal framework as I covered each section. My father asked 3 questions, all of them good questions, the kind of questions that told me he had read at least the executive summary. Marcus asked 1 question about whether there was anything he needed to sign today, which was not a question about the document but a question about the process, which told me what he had and had not engaged with. I answered it. Raymond walked through the signing documents. My father picked up the pen. He looked at Marcus first. I want to be accurate about this. It was not a long look. It was the half-second that precedes a decision already made, the kind of look that confirms rather than considers. He turned to the documents.
He signed.
He dated. He set the pen down and looked up at Marcus and extended his hand across the table, and Marcus took it, and my father said, "Carver Commercial Services. Yours now." And then he said, looking at Marcus with the satisfaction of a man completing something he had imagined for a long time, "You've always been the responsible one." The room did not change. That is what I remember most. No one flinched. No one looked at me. Raymond was looking at his documents. Marcus was looking at my father. My father was looking at Marcus. The responsible one. The words sat in the air of that room, and no one reached up to examine them. I was 2 chairs to his left with the 22-page document I had written open on my laptop. I had prepared their taxes for 6 years. I had caught the $47,000 error. I had driven over on Sundays for 6 years. I had built the succession framework. I was the CPA in the room. I looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at me. Not with pity. Not with the performed discomfort of someone calculating how to respond. He looked at me the way a man looks when he has just witnessed something he cannot correct and knows it plainly, with the full acknowledgement of what had just happened, and then he looked back at his documents. That was all. That was enough. I understood from that look that I had not imagined it. I understood from that look that it was real and that it had been witnessed, and that the witness was not going to speak, and neither was I. Something in me went very still. Not the polite stillness I maintained at client meetings when something surprised me. The real kind. The kind that starts in the chest and moves outward, That is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of something too large to process in a conference room on a folding chair in front of a whiteboard with a half-erased quarterly projection still visible on the left side. I closed my laptop. I did it carefully, without a sound. The way you do something when you have decided that how you do it is the only thing you can still control. I said, I think that covers everything on my end. Raymond, do you need anything else from me for the filing? Raymond said, No, I have everything I need. Thank you, Jonelle. This was exceptional work. I said, Thank you. I picked up the one-page summary I had printed and folded it in half and put it in my bag. I pushed back my chair. My father looked up.
You heading out? He said.
He said it the way you say it when you assume the answer is no, when it is a pro forma question and not a real one. I said, I have a 3:30 client call. This was true. I had scheduled it that way deliberately, the way I schedule things deliberately, because I understood even before arriving that I would want a reason to leave. My father said, Of course. Jonelle, I cannot thank you enough for everything you put into this. He said it with genuine feeling. He meant every word of it. That was the part that took the most sitting with, the part where the gratitude was real and the recognition was real, and neither of them were enough to have changed what had just happened. I said, Happy to help. Marcus, good luck with it. Marcus said, Thanks, Jay. I'm going to need your brain on this, you know that. I said, I know. I picked up my bag. I walked through the kitchen. My mother was at the counter. She said, Are you staying for coffee? I said, I can't, I have a call. She said, You work too hard. I said, I know. I walked out the front door. It was 2:17 in the afternoon. The sky was still the same overcast gray it had been when I arrived. 44 degrees. Entirely unremarkable. I walked to my car and got in and closed the door and sat with both hands on the steering wheel and did not start the engine. I want to tell you about those 14 minutes because I think they're the part that matters most. Not the room. Not the handshake. Not my father's voice saying the responsible one with that particular satisfaction. Those 14 minutes in the car in my parents' driveway on Fairfax Avenue while the overcast sky sat flat above the neighborhood and the engine was off and my laptop was in the passenger seat. I was not crying. I was not shaking. I was sitting in my Honda in my parents' driveway at 2:17 in the afternoon and doing something I had not fully allowed myself to do before, which was to look at the last 6 years with complete honesty. Not the version where I was oversensitive. Not the version where it was a slip of the tongue, a moment of enthusiasm, a father who had simply gotten carried away. The honest version. My father had just signed the transfer of his business to my brother in a meeting run on a document I had spent 11 days writing, in a process I had been building for 8 months, in front of an accountant whose only prior comment had been that my work was the most thorough pre-transition analysis he had received in 20 years of practice. And my father had shaken my brother's hand and said my brother was the responsible one. And not one person in that room had said anything, including me. I had closed my laptop and said thank you and told my mother I had a client call and walked out the front door, and the world had continued as though nothing had been named incorrectly. I thought about the Sundays. I thought about Denise Whitfield's handwritten card in my desk drawer. I thought about the $47,000 and my father's voice on the phone saying, Jonelle, you are something else, and what would we do without you? And the way that sentence had always been structured as a hypothetical, as a rhetorical expression of appreciation, never as a question he actually sat with long enough to consider the answer. I thought about a session 14 months earlier with my therapist, Dr. Anita Ford, who had asked me quietly and without pressure whether I thought my parents understood the scope of what I contributed to the business. I had said yes, in the careful way I say things when I am not entirely certain they are true, but am not ready to examine the uncertainty. Dr. Ford had waited. I had tried again. I had said I thought they knew, in the general sense. She had said, What's the difference between knowing and seeing? I had not been able to answer that with any precision. Sitting in the car at 2:17 on a Tuesday in March, I could answer it exactly. Knowing is what my father had when he said, Jonelle, you are something else. Knowing is the acknowledgement that something is being done, received into the general category of helpful, filed under family, appreciated in the way you appreciate weather when it is good, without specificity, without attribution, without the recognition that someone produced it deliberately and at cost to themselves. Seeing is something different. Seeing is what Raymond had done across that table in the moment after my father shook Marcus's hand. Seeing is what Vanessa had done at lunch in 2021 when she said, "Make sure you know what this costs you." Seeing requires looking at the specific thing, at the 22 pages and the 6 years of Sundays and the $47,000 and the succession framework built from scratch on personal time with no billing code, and acknowledging that a person made all of that happen, and that person was present in the room, and that person's name was not the one spoken when it was time to say, who had always been the responsible one. My father knew what I did. He had never once seen what it meant. I put the car in reverse at 2:31 p.m. I did not go back inside. I drove away from Fairfax Avenue on a route I had driven so many times I could have driven it without thinking, and I did drive it without thinking, with the radio off and the heat still running, and the flat gray sky above the highway. I thought about what Vanessa had said in 2021, and about how I had told her I knew what it cost and that it was worth it. I thought about all the ways I had told myself that story. The story where being useful was sufficient, where gratitude was the same as recognition, where the work spoke for itself, where one day the right moment would arrive, and my father would look at what I had built and understand, specifically and completely, what it had taken and who had done it. I had been telling myself that story for 6 years. I had been driving to Fairfax Avenue on Sundays with my laptop and my coffee for 6 years. The right moment had arrived, and my father had looked at it and shaken my brother's hand. I got home at 3:44 p.m. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop and joined my 3:30 client call 7 minutes late and apologized and conducted the call professionally for 51 minutes and resolved the issue the client had called about, which was a discrepancy in their Q4 estimated payments that turned out to be a data entry error. And after the call, I sat at the table with the laptop open and did not move for a while. The apartment was quiet in the way apartments are quiet in the middle of a weekday afternoon, that particular stillness that belongs to you when the rest of the world is elsewhere. I looked at my kitchen. The framed print above the counter that I had bought at a market 2 years ago because the color was exactly right. The copper kettle on the stove. The stack of client files I had been working through before the weekend. I felt, sitting there, that I was in the right place. That this was mine in a way that Fairfax Avenue had never quite managed to be. Being indispensable is not the same as being irreplaceable. I want to be careful about this distinction because I spent a long time confusing them. Indispensable means they need what you do. Irreplaceable means they know it is you doing it.
My family needed what I did.
They did not, in the end, see who was doing it, not specifically, not in the way that would have required them to adjust the story they were telling about which child had always been the responsible one. My father texted on the 3rd day. I know it was the 3rd day because I did not look at my phone on the 1st day or the 2nd day with any expectation of hearing from him, and because on the 3rd day, a Thursday at 11:23 in the morning, my phone buzzed on my desk at the office and I picked it up and read, "Jonelle, Marcus said you left early Tuesday. Everything okay? Your mother is asking." I read it twice. He had written my name correctly, the full 4 syllables, with the capital J. I set the phone face down on my desk and looked at the client file I had been working on, a quarterly review for a small manufacturing company in Blue Ash, and I thought about the text. He had not realized I had left early. He had required Marcus to tell him. He had texted not because he had noticed anything but because my mother was asking, which meant my mother had noticed, and had asked him to follow up, which meant the concern about my absence was being routed through the same channels that everything in that family was routed, through the people who made noise about things until someone addressed them. I had never made noise. I had always been the one the noise was routed to.
I did not reply that day.
I did not reply the next. On the 5th day, a Saturday, at 9:47 in the morning, Vanessa called. She said, "Are you okay? You've been quiet." I said, "I'm okay. Actually okay. Not perform okay." She said, "Tell me." So I told her. I told her about the room and the pen and the handshake and the responsible one. I told her about the 14 minutes in the driveway. I told her about the 6 years of Sundays and the $47,000 and the 22-page document open on my laptop. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I told you. She said it without satisfaction. She said it the way you say the true thing to a person you love when the true thing has finally arrived. I said, I know. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know yet. Something different than what I've been doing. She said, good. She pulled something toward herself. I heard the sound of a container opening, take out something, and outside her window the Saturday morning was whatever it was, and I sat at my own kitchen table with the copper kettle on the stove and the site plans and the quiet that was completely mine, and I felt, for the first time in 6 years, like I was not waiting for something. I replied to my father's text 11 days after he sent it. I kept it short. I said I was fine, and that I needed some time, and that I would reach out when I was ready to have a real conversation. I did not explain. I did not apologize. I did not add the qualifiers I would have added a year ago. The I just need a little space paired with the I'm sure it wasn't intentional, and the I know you appreciate everything. I do know that. I had written that message before, in different forms, in phone calls and in kitchen conversations, and in the careful texts I composed on Sundays driving home from Fairfax Avenue when something had landed wrong, and I had let it pass without naming it. I was not going to write it again. I sent what I sent, put my phone in my coat pocket, and walked to the coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment and sat in the window booth with the book I had been meaning to finish for 2 months and read for an hour and a half without checking my messages. Marcus texted in April. He said, Hey Jay, trying to figure out the Q1 books. Can you walk me through the reconciliation process? I looked at that text for a long time. I thought about the Sunday drives. I thought about the laptop in the passenger seat and the coffee in the cup holder and the 3 to 5 hours at the kitchen table. I wrote back, I'm not going to be doing the bookkeeping going forward. Denise knows the system well. She's been running it for 4 years and she's good. If you need more support, Hendricks and Lowe does business accounting work. I can send you the contact info. He replied, Oh, okay. Is everything all right? I wrote, Everything's fine. Good luck with Q1. I put the phone face down on my desk and went back to the manufacturing company's quarterly review and did not think about it again that day. I still see Dr. Ford every other week. In our April session, she asked me how it felt to have sent that text to Marcus. I told her it felt like setting something down that I had been carrying so long, I had stopped noticing the weight of it. She said, What did you think was going to happen if you kept carrying it? I said, I think I believed that eventually the weight of it would become visible to them, that someone would notice how much I was holding and acknowledge it. She said, And? I said, And the weight is invisible until you put it down. The moment you put it down is the first moment anyone notices it existed. She said, What does it feel like now? I sat with that for a moment. I thought about the Sunday mornings I now spent differently, reading, or working on things that were mine, or calling Vanessa, or driving to the farmer's market on Ludlow Avenue where there is a vendor who sells the specific kind of Earl Grey I like in a blue tin with a slightly dented lid from where it was dropped in shipping. I said, It feels like mine. The time feels like mine. She wrote something in her notebook. I did not ask what. I called my father in May on a Sunday at 10:22 in the morning after I had finished my coffee and reviewed the site assessment for a new client, a small restaurant group in Kivington that needed their accounts restructured, and felt, for the first time since March, like I had something to say rather than something to survive. He answered on the second ring. He sounded like himself, warm and a little surprised, the specific warmth of a man who is relieved to hear from someone and does not fully understand why he needed to be relieved. We talked for 38 minutes. He told me the transition had been harder than he expected, that Marcus was working at it but that there were systems he did not understand, and that Denise had been patient but that things had slipped in Q1 that would not have slipped before. He said this without any apparent awareness of what he was describing, in the tone of someone reporting operational information rather than confirming something about the choice he had made. I let him finish. I said, Dad, I want to talk to you about something. He said, Of course. I said, You signed the business to Marcus in a meeting run on a document I wrote, in a process I built over 8 months, and then you told him he had always been the responsible one. I was 2 chairs away from you. I had been doing the financial work on that business for 6 years. He was quiet. Not the quiet of someone composing a response. The quiet of someone who has been handed something they were not expecting to hold. I said, "I'm not telling you the decision was wrong. That's your business, and it was yours to give to whoever you chose. I'm telling you what it cost me to hear what you said after you signed it and why I needed time after." He said after a long pause, "I didn't think about how that landed." I said, "I know." He said, "Jonelle, what you did for this company, I don't know how to." I said, "I know, Dad. That's exactly what I've been sitting with." He did not have an answer for that. I did not need one. I was not calling to receive the apology that would reset everything to the way it had been, that would let us return to Sundays on Fairfax Avenue with my laptop and his football game in the other room. That version of things was finished, not because I was punishing him, but because it had been finished for 6 years, and I had been the only one who had not acknowledged it. I was calling because I had spent 34 years being seen in the general sense by a man who loved me and had never learned to see me in the specific one, and I had decided that if there was going to be anything real between us going forward, it would have to begin from the place where I had said the true thing plainly, without cushioning the edges, without making it easier for either of us to step around. We ended the call, without resolution. I expected that. He needs time with things. He may or may not come back to this one. I have stopped investing in the prediction. What I can tell you is what I did the following Sunday. I drove to the farmer's market on Ludlow Avenue and bought the Earl Grey tin and a bunch of ranunculus in the particular shade of pale orange that I have been putting on my kitchen table since I moved into my apartment 3 years ago, and I drove back and made tea and sat at my own table with the flowers and a glass on the counter, and the morning being entirely, completely mine. I thought about the Sundays on Fairfax Avenue. I thought about the 6 years and the $47,000 and the 22 pages and the succession framework that was now in someone else's hands, being used by someone who had not asked where it came from. I thought about Denise Whitfield's thank you card in my desk drawer. I thought about Raymond Kowalczyk's look across the conference table, plain, steady, the full acknowledgement of what had happened. I thought about what it means to build something that holds without you standing next to it explaining its value. The books were still there. The entity modification was still saving them money. The accounting software was still running correctly. The work had held. It had just never been mine in the way I had believed it was. There is a difference between being the person a family calls and being a person that family sees. I want to be clear about that because I know how this story sounds from inside a family like mine, like a woman who did too much and then held it against everyone when she didn't get enough credit, like someone who should have said something sooner or charged what she was worth or simply declined. None of that is wrong, exactly. All of it misses the point. The point is not that I gave too much. The point is that I gave what I gave believing that the giving would eventually make me visible in the specific way I needed to be visible, and that belief was the error. And the error was mine as much as it was anyone else's. I cannot make my father see me in the way he sees Marcus. I understand that now in the complete, undecorated sense. I can only decide what I build from here, and who I build it for, and whether the audience I am building for has ever once looked up from what I made and said my name like they knew I was in the room. Competence is not the same as being chosen. Being relied on is not the same as being seen. I can stop carrying what was never mine to prove. I did not go to Fairfax Avenue that summer. I went to work and I did the work I am genuinely good at, and I called Vanessa on Saturdays and I bought ranunculus at the farmer's market and I drove past my own life and watched it hold its shape without anyone watching it. That was enough. That was more than enough.